Mother's Blood, Sister's Songs, the story of how the genetics of Iceland reveals its Irish motherhood, with composer Linda Buckley.
So we're standing on the cliffs at the Old Head of Kinsale, which is where I grew up, in a very large family of 9 children, and I'm the youngest. This, in a way, was our playground where we could run through the fields. It's a dairy farm, so we would have been helping on that with the cows. So it's just a very big, strong part of us, and it's such a beautiful place and so expansive. It's a very dramatic part of the coastline. It's jutting out 2 miles into the Atlantic Ocean, and so you have the Atlantic Ocean around you at 3 sides. So it almost in some ways feels like you're on an island, but you're just connected with one small strip of land. So in that sense, you kind of feel a little bit removed from the rest of the country, but yet connected in a small way too. I have such strong memories of always being outside, and I suppose it was handy in a way with the 9 of us that we could be outside and use the fields as to play in. But we also worked a lot on the farm, so we would have been bringing in the hay and helping with the cows, and we still do when we come home again. So it's a very much an active working farm. Well, there are these sheltered parts along the cliff here where you can really hear bird song and seagulls and sounds of boats and sounds of the water. And then also growing up, a big aspect of what I remember is hearing the sound of the foghorn when it would be a misty night or a misty day. And it was very almost reverberant and haunting, and it probably feeds into my love of music that is very kind of rich and dense and saturated and misty and cloudy in a way, because I feel connected to that very strongly, visually and sonically, I think. I really think that had a huge impact on us, and probably one of the reasons why I'm not the only musician in my family, that there's 4 of us and another composer as well. We were always hearing, I suppose, the sounds of the sea, I think, runs through almost everything that I do, whether unconsciously or actually in recorded sound. Also sound of birds, seagulls, and I think definitely the foghorn was a huge memory for me growing up, and the kind of haunting melancholy of it through the fog. And I remember it's one of my earliest memories of sound, is hearing that. The farm was bought by my father from a cousin of his, and it would have been in the family for 200 years before that. So it really feels very connected to us from such a way back. Also, my grandmother would have been working in the fields, and she heard the torpedo of the Lusitania in 1915. So there's that sense of history kind of seeping into our upbringing in a way too. I'm often not aware of that at the time when I'm creating something. It's only after the fact that I realise, because it's often not a very conscious decision. I just think it's part of me and part of who I am. Even when I was living in the middle of Manhattan, I feel like my music was still within this kind of landscape. So no matter where I go, this is just a part of me, and I think it will emerge in any of the kind of music that I write. There's a kind of a bleak beauty to here. I mean, it's hard to tell now because it's the summertime and we have a lot of lush greenery around, but in the middle of winter it's a very different place, and it can feel almost slightly harsh, but there's something very haunting about that in a way, which I felt absolutely in Iceland, even though when I was there it was August and 23 hours of daylight. But there was the sense of, you were really at the mercy of nature in a way, which I always have felt here, and I felt very strongly there. Over the years I would have heard music that came from Iceland, so it would have been Björk and it would have been Sigur Rós, groups like Moom and Amina, and just that sense of expansion as well, I think, in the sound world of what they have. I mean, I was listening to that music, I suppose, as a teenager, and I never really connected with it in my head that it was maybe to do with landscape, but actually of course it is, because I mean, when I went to Iceland in 2014, I really felt that many aspects of the landscape felt very connected to here as well. I loved the sound world of the language, actually, and I felt it would work very well in choral settings. So the first time I worked with that would have been in this piece called Haustid Nalgast, Fall Approaches, which uses Icelandic text. And it's all to do with autumn approaching and how we have to get ready for the darkness descending, but we know that we are going to be safe because there's lights from the stars in the sky looking down upon us. And so there's a lovely idea of, even though darkness is coming, that there's a beauty in it as well. I heard a recording of Steindor Anderson, who was chanting the rimur of Haustid Nalgast, and it was also to do with the strange kind of accents and pronunciation and certain stresses on syllables that I felt were quite unusual, which is part of rimur chant as well. And I started to delve a little bit more into his work, and then of course he later went on to work with people like Sigur Rós. I think a lot of what Sigur Rós were doing, the nature of Hope Landic, which is the Aunsie's made-up language, which is sort of quasi-Icelandic. It has this beauty in a way because you're not honing in on the meaning or semantic meaning behind the words. You're actually just really listening for the sound. And I feel like that sometimes when I sing sean-nós in other places that, is not Ireland, where maybe the Gaelic is not being understood in a very clear way. It's a quick pointer towards the emotion of the song rather than the actual meaning of the words. The minute I stepped off the plane, I really felt this, it is somewhere I always had to be, and it felt so natural to be there. And we drove from Reykjavik to Laugarvatn, which is about 2.5 hours east, and straight away I saw Hekla and I saw the lake, and I just immediately kind of heard sound and started to write music very quickly when I was there. It almost felt as though everything I was writing became wider, like panoramic, and expanded out, even in a sort of a spatial way. And I think that's just to do with the landscape being so wide and so open and horizon lasting for so long that it feels like I didn't want to be hemmed in, and it was like the music had to break out into something much wider. I wrote Turin for the Crash Ensemble, and I wrote Frieder for Isabel O'Connell for piano and electronics. Also, I had been working before that on a piece for Iarla Lenord, a song cycle, which was partly written in Gotland, an island off the Baltic Sea. So that was also a kind of a similar landscape in a way. I remember walking down the street and seeing people who actually looked quite like me and thinking, what is this about? And being quite puzzled by it. And then seeing a lot of actually girls at the time with long red curly hair and freckles and things. And I was thinking, these look more Irish than the Irish themselves, and what's happening there. So it was so interesting to then research and delve into that aspect. I'm looking for something concrete and tangible that gives evidence connected to what I've always felt, which is this strong connection. And in a way, I felt like it was almost this imagined world within me that felt like those places were very linked. And now it's so amazing to discover that there's an actual reality to this. And I really want to learn more about that.